There is a big problem with America's public school system. Schools across the United States do not provide equal opportunities for every student. Not every student has access to the education they deserve. We're here to teach you how students like us are taught.
Throughout the United States, millions of students attend free public schools. However, schools across the country do not provide equal opportunities for every student because the quality of education varies across district borders.
Much of this disparity comes down to funding.
For many states, state funding makes up a bulk of education funding, with local funding also representing a significant portion.
The problem arises from varying property taxes, which much of local school funding is dependent on.
More affluent areas where homeowners pay more in property taxes generally have better funded schools than poorer areas.
Take, for example, the school districts around Chicago. The city, when compared to neighboring districts, gets substantially more aid than its neighbors. However, it is clear that it can't compete financially with districts that are able to pull in more local property tax.
A lot of the lack in school funding from the states can be traced back to the recession in 2007. A survey by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities states at least 31 states provided less state funding per student in the 2014 school year than in the 2008 school year, before the recession took hold. Many school districts still haven't fully recovered since the budget cuts of the recession.
It shows how economic networks and exchanges contribute to the strength of an education system. In many instances of economic decline, education is often one of the institutions that get their budgets slashed. Also, the haves and have-nots here are evident. You either live in an area that has good public education, or you don't. And if we look further back to history, it can be seen that this disparity also existed long before the recession. Take, for example, the Serrano v. Priest case in California in the 1970s. Back then, the plaintiffs claimed that students were receiving unequal education due to the heavy reliance of districts on property taxes and the inadequacy of the state to make up the difference. The courts would find that education was indeed a fundamental right and intended to reform school funding.
On the effects of unequal education, the court stated, unequal education leads to unequal job opportunities, disparate income, and handicapped ability to participate in the social, cultural, and political activity of our society.
The short-term effects of this is that some students don't have access to the same materials as might students in another district.
Supporters of using property taxes to fund public education claim that property taxes are the most stable sources of funding. They argue that income and sales tax are unstable sources of funding, especially in times of recession.
Opponents claim that funding schools through property taxes will hinder the accessibility of students in low-income neighborhoods to an adequate education.
A study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development shows the short-term effects of inadequate education funding. Low morale is an effect of the wealth discrimination found when it comes to public school funding. Schools whose principals reported that teacher shortages hinder learning tend to show lower performance. Principals in advantaged schools in the United States tend to have much more positive views of the adequacy of material resources than principals in disadvantaged schools.
The effects of the education funding disparity is global. There is a 15% variation in student performance based on a student's socioeconomic status. This contrasts with roughly variations 10% or less in countries like Finland, Hong Kong, China, Japan, and Norway. Students who are born in a lower socioeconomic class and who come from parents with higher education are disadvantaged from the start compared to students born to wealthier families. Haves and have-nots here are evident in the public school system. Students who have more money tend to live in areas with better schools, and they tend to receive better opportunities. Disadvantaged youth are set up to fail from the start in a system with the intended purpose to help them succeed.
We asked students what they thought about the funding disparity in America's public school system.
Alright, so without school funding, a student may never reach their potentials to what they could possibly be. They could be like a best athlete, best scholar, or like anything in general. And yeah.
My name's Isabella, and I'm part of the Fairfield Sassoon Unified School District.
We asked her if she believed her school was adequately funded.
No,
Well, why do you think that?
because like sports programs in like Walnut Creek and Concord are able to afford more sports programs such as pole vaulting, or have the better uniforms, or even just have the better coaches. And schools that are in different areas don't get to have that opportunity to experience a good sports program in order to get them better benefits for college opportunities.
Do you think it's fair that there's funding inequality in schools, and what do you think can be done to fix this?
I don't think it's fair, and I think one way that could fix this is if we spread the money evenly from like state taxes and not just put it all into one area. Maybe spread it out evenly and give more money to like schools that actually need it, such as like Fairfield High School, because I know that they have a lot of needs there.
We asked her what was her opinion on some schools offering more programs and classes because they received more funding due to their location.
I think that more schools need to be offered more money in order to open those programs, in order for kids to benefit more from their education and feel like they have better opportunities.
We also asked the teacher a few questions about school funding.
I think most school funding goes to teacher salary, administrators' salaries, textbooks, and then a whole variety of things. But I think the biggest chunk does go to salaries.
Do you believe that most school spending priorities are created with students in mind?
I can't speak to all of them, but in my experience, they try to do it but are not very successful. They have so much overhead, like lots and lots of administrators and people in the district office, etc. And I think that a lot of money goes toward bureaucracy instead of the kids a lot of the time.
Do you think that education funding has a direct correlation with student performance?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. I think that the more money you can put into classrooms to make smaller classes and get better resources, the better it will work.
Schools in affluent areas tend to offer more classes and programs to their students because they receive more funding. What's your opinion on this, and do you think it's fair?
Well, do I think it's fair? No, of course I don't. There are some areas where they get very, very little money, where they really need the money the most. But because there is funding that comes from the local areas, from taxes, etc., the areas where there's richer people who will put more money into the schools, those are the areas that get all the money. And they're usually the ones where the kids already have all the advantages. Areas like, like Vallejo and other places where people are not as wealthy get shafted, don't get the money they need.
What do you think is the best solution to funding disparity?
I think that less money should come from the local area and more from the state and federal. I think that taxes should go into a general school fund pool and the money should be equally distributed. And in some cases, more money should go to poorer areas than in richer areas.
If you could change the way schools were funded, what would be your number one priority and what would you do?
Well, my number one priority would be to reduce class sizes because I really think that the smaller classes, the kids learn more and they learn better. So I would put more money into reducing class sizes, hiring more teachers so you could have smaller class sizes. And I'd also implement something like I said, where all the school money gets pooled and then divided up in a more equitable way.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Hawkins.
You're welcome.
America's public school system is in financial disarray. Some schools have the funds to give their students an excellent education and countless opportunities to succeed, but some schools can barely offer any opportunities. Inadequate education funding have long-term effects that extend far beyond primary and secondary education. Disadvantaged youth are in an unending cycle of poverty, and schools with inadequate funding have low morale and fail to motivate their students to pursue better.
Lawmakers today are advocating a fix for this broken system by privatizing public education through charter schools and voucher programs. Vouchers are ways for students to pull their funding from the public education system and apply it to private school tuition. However, this proposal of school choice does not address the funding disparity in America, and it may even contribute to the failure of America's public school system. The public needs to be informed of this inequality, and lawmakers need to listen to the concerns of students and educators. There is no doubt a funding problem in the public education system, and if nothing is done, the problem will only get worse.